Let's get divorced now that I have a new family. You and our daughter need to leave. Oh, and you should know I won't be paying any alimony, David declared brazenly, with Abigail nodding along beside him. Their attitudes seemed to suggest that my thoughts on the matter were irrelevant. Only the babies in the stroller, blissfully unaware, slept peacefully. David hadn't helped at all when Alyssa was born either. He spent his days fooling around and even dipped into Alyssa's college fund. Despite never fulfilling his duties as a father, here he was, selfishly starting a new family. Did he ever consider how Alyssa and I would feel? Various thoughts raced through my mind, leaving me speechless. Alyssa glanced at the TV that had been left on and said, "Huh, Dad, aren't you watching TV?" At those words, David suddenly burst into a shout. "My name is Patricia, and I'm a housewife in my 50s. I've been living with my husband, David, and our daughter, Alyssa. I met David at the company I joined after graduating college. If there's anything you don't understand, please don't hesitate to ask," David had said to me when he saw how nervous I was as a new hire with no work experience. David patiently taught me about the job, and I naturally started asking him various questions. As we spent time together, we quickly grew close. Eventually, David confessed his feelings for me. "I fell for how dedicated you are to your work. Would you like to go out with me?" he'd asked. "I'd love to," I replied, already having feelings for David too. We started dating and quickly got married. A few years later, we were blessed with Alyssa. However, it wasn't as if every day was joyful. In fact, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that many days were filled with pain. The cause was David's infidelity. It happened around the time I was pregnant with Alyssa. Up until then, David had cherished me dearly. When he found out I was pregnant, he even shed tears, saying, "Thank you. I had severe morning sickness, to the point where just smelling food would make me nauseous." After we got married, David had strongly urged me to quit my job. David was up for a promotion at the time, so I accepted his request. As a full-time housewife, I took care of all the housework. I felt it was only natural since I was at home, but cooking while feeling so ill was quite painful. "Honey, I'm sorry, but would it be all right if we eat out or buy prepared meals for a while?" I felt guilty asking this when I was entrusted with the housework, but I gathered my courage and asked David as he was relaxing in the living room. He furrowed his brow for a moment before asking in a stern voice, "Why? You're a housewife, aren't you? You're not working, so I need you to take care of the housework properly. Otherwise, you're just a freeloader." To be fair, there was some truth to what David was saying. The fact was I was now living off David's income. It was perfectly reasonable for him to expect housework in exchange, but I simply couldn't do it. And it wasn't because I was being lazy. Desperately trying to convey my feelings, I pleaded with David. "The morning sickness is making me nauseous. Just smelling food makes me feel like I'm going to throw up. Honestly, even other housework is difficult with my heavy belly." "Shut up. That's just an excuse. You're a housewife, so do the housework properly. What if my health suffers from this kind of diet? It's your job to prepare nutritious, lovingly made meals to welcome your husband home." His words were so harsh that I felt dizzy on the spot. I wasn't asking him to help every day, but even on his days off, David just relaxed in the living room. He could have helped out a little with the housework. No matter how desperately I tried to express my feelings, David wouldn't listen at all. So I endured the nausea and my heavy belly to somehow manage the housework. It was a hellish time, but when Alyssa was born, I felt both relief that the painful days were finally over and moved by the sight of Alyssa crying in the delivery room. David said he was working and didn't even come to the hospital when I called, let alone attend the birth. The nurses looked somewhat uncomfortable seeing this, but holding Alyssa made me forget all the unpleasant things. I decided then and there that I would protect this child for the rest of my life. I would make sure she could live comfortably, no matter what happened. That's what I resolved from the bottom of my heart. As expected, David didn't participate in childcare at all. To save money for raising Alyssa, I decided to put her in daycare and start working from home. Of course, I had discussed this with David too. Someone like you with no skills, the work you do from home will be hardly different from playing around. It probably won't make much money, but do what you want, David sneered without even bothering to ask about the work. It was frustrating, but I was determined to use those feelings as motivation and work hard. "Daddy, play with me," Alyssa would sometimes call out to him. If it were me, I would have immediately smiled and played with her, but David looked annoyed and shooed her away. "Daddy's busy. I don't have time to play with you. Go play with Mommy," he said, hurriedly getting dressed and leaving. Come to think of it, David seemed to be going out more often lately. Not just on weekends, but his return time on weekdays had gotten later too. I checked his pace, but there was no sign of overtime work. Since I used to work at his company, I knew it wasn't the type of place to force excessive unpaid overtime. Could it be an affair? As soon as that thought crossed my mind, I immediately hired a detective. Sure enough, it was discovered that my husband was having an affair with another woman. How could you do this when we have a child? This is unacceptable as a father. Let's get divorced, I said, filled with anger, confronting David with divorce papers. But David tried to placate me, saying, "Please, anything but divorce. What about Alyssa? If her father disappears while she's so young, it could affect her personality." To be honest, I was worried about that too. If we divorced now, Alyssa would be raised by a single parent. Even if it didn't affect her personality, she might get teased at school. However, that wasn't enough to quell my anger. I was sure we would end up divorcing. That's what I thought, but something made me reconsider the divorce. It was Alyssa's sleep talking. "Daddy, let's play," Alyssa mumbled in a small voice while sleeping soundly. Ever since David's affair came to light, there had been a tense atmosphere in our home. Alyssa had probably sensed that somehow, and yet this child was still longing for her father. Her innocence brought tears to my eyes and made me disgusted with myself for almost taking her father away from her out of anger. When Alyssa no longer needs her father, we can divorce. Then, with that change of heart, I decided not to divorce, on the conditions that I would demand more than the usual compensation from the other woman and that David would spend time with Alyssa once a week. In the end, David ended up covering the compensation the other woman was supposed to pay, but I didn't care about that. As long as I could deal a blow to both of them, that was enough. After that, David kept his promise and played with Alyssa once a week, as agreed. However, that didn't last long either. I wanted to confront him about breaking our agreement, but I hesitated to bring up the past and cause Alyssa more pain now that our relationship had somewhat recovered and we weren't fighting every day. Time passed, and we entered our 50s. Alyssa was over 20, employed, and able to support herself. David had been on an overseas assignment for the past 3 years, so I ended up living alone at home during that time. Worried about me, Alyssa continued living with me even after getting a job. Since David started his overseas assignment, he rarely came home. Naturally, David's presence faded from our lives. That day was Alyssa's day off work, and we were relaxing, watching TV and eating snacks. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. "Yes, who is it?" I called as I checked the door, where David stood with a young blonde woman holding a stroller. At first glance, this woman didn't look much older than Alyssa. In the stroller, twin babies were sleeping peacefully. Not understanding what was going on just from the video, I nervously but curiously opened the door to let them in. "Nice to meet you, Mom. I'm Abigail. David and I are in a relationship," she said. I was stunned by her words. This man had betrayed his family not once but twice, and this time with a woman barely older than his daughter. The thought of a man in his 50s being infatuated with someone so young made me feel sick to my stomach. Seeing that I was too shocked to speak, David must have thought I was upset. With a shallow, giggling smile, he said, "As you can see, I have a new family now, so let's get divorced. You and our daughter need to leave. Oh, and you should know I won't be paying any alimony." "Oh, David, you're so mean," Abigail said playfully. David's eyes sparkled as if to say, "I told her," while Abigail egged him on. They both smiled at me mockingly, as if I were irrelevant. Only the babies in the stroller, blissfully unaware, slept peacefully. Their innocent faces reminded me of Alyssa's sleep-talking from years ago. However, Alyssa, who had been quietly watching this unfold, suddenly pointed at the TV. "Huh, Dad, aren't you watching TV?" At those words, everyone's attention turned to the TV. There was a news segment with the headline, "Rising Female CEO Rumors of $500 million Annual Revenue." The camera switched to show the interviewee, and David suddenly started shouting, "What's going on? Why are you on TV?" You see, the female CEO being interviewed was me. When Alyssa entered daycare and I started working from home, my work was really small at first, but as things started to take off, I founded a company to help others like me find good opportunities. At first, I wasn't sure how it would go, but there turned out to be quite a demand. Our performance grew, and we even went public 2 years ago. Now we're a company that people in this field aspire to work for, with a constant stream of job applicants and work requests. As I explained this, David's face turned pale. Abigail beside him looked flustered for a moment, but seeing David's reaction, she quickly tried to cover for him. But David earns money too, right? Maybe not $500 million, but you said you're a department head now and you have another promotion coming up, right? Hearing those words, I couldn't help but exclaim, huh? It seems David had been telling Abigail things that weren't true to win her over. That man isn't a department head or anything, just a regular employee. What? Abigail shouted. It's true that David had been up for a promotion when we first got married, but after that, talk of promotion disappeared. The reason was that David had embezzled company funds. Even if it was just a small amount, embezzlement is embezzlement. Feeling sorry for David, who was crying about how terrible a thing he had done, I apologized to the president over and over again. On top of that, I repaid several times the amount David had embezzled, with interest. Of course, that money came from my savings, thanks to a certain connection I had with the president, and out of consideration for my desperate apologies, it was agreed that David could keep his job on the condition that he would absolutely never be promoted again, no matter what. I'm truly grateful to the president, but I also feel like I made an unnecessary effort. In the end, David couldn't get promoted after that, so of course there's no way he could become a department head. He must have lied to make himself look better to Abigail. When I revealed this, Abigail's face turned pale. Why did you lie like that? You're not a department head, just a regular employee. I can't believe this. If I had known, I never would have done this, Abigail shouted, throwing a tantrum. David pleaded tearfully to Abigail. I had no choice. I just wanted you to notice me. That's how much I love you. The ugly scene of these two adults was painful to watch. To be honest, the word chaos perfectly described the situation. In the midst of this, Alyssa brought an envelope from her room and laid its contents on the table. Actually, I knew Dad was having an affair, she said. Everyone, including me, was shocked by Alyssa's words. According to her, it started when one of her friends saw David in Japan when he was supposed to be on an overseas business trip. Shown a photo and confirming it was undoubtedly David, Alyssa immediately hired a detective to investigate. After explaining the situation to my parents and getting them to cover the cost, Alyssa had the detective track David's movements, focusing on where he had been spotted. Sure enough, a mountain of evidence of the affair came to light. However, she couldn't bring herself to tell me. She worried that if I received such a big shock, the other woman being close to her age, it would deal a severe blow to my heart. So Alyssa decided to wait and see how things unfolded. Then this incident occurred. On the table were documents and photos clearly showing David and Abigail's affair. Seeing this, their faces turned bright red, but Alyssa continued speaking. To be honest, what you're doing is despicable, Dad. Betraying Mom and selfishly starting a new family elsewhere is absolutely unforgivable. I don't have many memories of you playing with me, but I'm truly disappointed in you. Alyssa must have felt a level of disgust beyond words. I too felt it was a waste of time to deal with these people any longer. I just wanted to settle this quickly, but for that to happen, they needed to face the consequences properly. Of course I'll be demanding compensation, and I'll be informing your company president about this as well, I said. When I mentioned the president, David's face turned pale. Of course, by president, I meant the president of the company David works for. If this matter comes to light, David, who had already committed misconduct, will surely be fired this time. Wait, how can you even contact the president directly? You're just a former employee. You shouldn't have that kind of authority. About that, Abigail was right. Normally, it wouldn't be easy for a former employee like me to contact the president directly. Why was I able to do so? The answer lay in my relationship with the president. The president is my father's childhood friend. At those words, David and Abigail both exclaimed, "What?" I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Alyssa is going to work as usual. At first, she suggested we look for separate places, but apparently Alyssa sees me as very lonely. She said, "Let's live together in the new house too." Indulging in Alyssa's kindness, I'm looking for a new home, working and sometimes going out to play with Alyssa. With David, the troublesome presence gone, I now have more time to enjoy with Alyssa. This is the first time since getting married that I've been able to truly enjoy various things from the bottom of my heart without any worries. However, such happy times don't last long. It was a weekday, and I was at the office. After confirming the day's schedule with my secretary, I sat at my computer to tackle the day's work. That's when my phone started ringing incessantly. It was David. Of course, I couldn't answer while working. I make a point of clearly separating work and private life, so I ignored it. But it kept ringing again and again. How annoying, I thought. Feeling irritated, I decided to answer the call after returning to the hotel. As it was still ringing, I looked at the call history. It seems he had been calling non-stop since I first noticed. Before I could even say hello, David's anguished cry came through. "Help me! I'm about to lose the house." Hearing David's words, to be honest, I sighed, thinking, is that all? That's only natural, isn't it? After all, that house is in my name. Yes, I was the owner of the house we had been living in as a family. To be precise, when we first signed the contract, it was in both David's and my names. However, after David's embezzlement incident, when it became clear he wouldn't be promoted and might struggle with loan payments, we changed the name on the deed to just mine. In other words, I had been the one paying all the mortgage payments for that house. David had only contributed a tiny amount, so it was perfectly normal for him to be evicted now that I wasn't living there. It's such an obvious thing, yet he couldn't even realize that. It seems I had been coddling David for far too long. I wonder if the future would have been different if I had expressed my intentions more clearly. Hearing my words, David seemed to finally remember these events. Looking startled, he desperately clung on. "Please do something. The president told me I'm fired. At this rate, I'll lose not just my job, but my home too. How am I supposed to live like this? That's not my problem. Figure it out yourself." This situation was entirely David's own doing. If David hadn't betrayed us, even if we weren't on the best terms, we could have managed to continue as a family somehow. The fact that we couldn't was all David's fault. Yet David refused to accept his own sins and clung on pathetically. How could he continue to show such a disgraceful sight of himself? Even if he showed me such a pitiful sight, I wouldn't feel any sympathy. My relationship with David was already over in my mind. To be honest, I found it distasteful to even deal with him, so I decided to end the conversation clearly. "If you try to delay submitting the divorce papers, we'll go to court. That would make it even harder for you to find a job, wouldn't it? Poor thing. I wonder if you'll be able to pay the settlement on top of that." David audibly gulped at my words. I added, twisting the knife, "Oh, by the way, about the president. He seemed angrier than I expected. I hear he's spreading the word about you to various places. Good for you. You're not famous after all. No, please do something. If this happens, I'll..." David's voice was tinged with utter despair. It was so amusing that I couldn't help but smile, but all of this was David's fault. David, who had continued to betray me and Alyssa for years. Marrying David must have been a mistake from the start. Why did I ever marry such a person? From the bottom of my heart, I felt ashamed of my younger self for being attracted to David. "I don't care. You brought this on yourself, didn't you? Well, I'm hanging up now. I'll send you the lawyer's contact information later, so please direct all future communication there. Goodbye." "Wait, Patricia. Don't abandon me." With those words from David, I ended the call. Although the phone kept ringing several more times, I quickly blocked David's number and sent only the lawyer's contact information before blocking his messages too. This ensured David could never contact me again. I decided to tell Alyssa to block his contact information as well. Feeling relieved that the matter was finally settled, the rest of the story is what I heard from the lawyer. Apparently, although David initially hesitated to submit the divorce papers, he quietly did so when told he might face a court battle. However, that wasn't the end of it. To pay the settlement to me, David borrowed a large sum of money from some shady sources. You might wonder why he would turn to such places, but my parents-in-law had given up on David after this incident. I had also forewarned his friends, so David had nowhere else to turn and ended up resorting to such measures. While he managed to pay the settlement, David couldn't repay the loan. As a result, I heard through the grapevine that he was taken away by some suspicious individuals and is now supposedly working on a fishing boat somewhere at sea. By the way, I also demanded compensation from Abigail. However, it was all paid by Abigail's parents. I thought she might not have suffered much of a blow, but that wasn't the case. Apparently, Abigail's parents were so furious about this incident that they're now managing all her income, including what she earns herself. As a result, despite being so young, she can't freely use her own salary, and her beauty is fading rapidly. Incidentally, those babies turned out not to be David's children after all. They're now being taken care of by Abigail's parents. When I met them once in the presence of a lawyer, they seemed like decent people, so I'm sure those twins will grow up without any problems. I secretly breathed a sigh of relief about that. Since then, I've been spending my days leisurely working. Actually, Alyssa also works at my company as an office clerk. Although I don't intend to show favoritism just because she's my daughter, Alyssa is quite an excellent employee and is well liked by everyone in the company. One day, Alyssa told me she had something to discuss. I worried that something might be wrong, but seeing the young man standing next to her made me smile. "Mom, I've decided to get married," Alyssa said, blushing. "As a parent, I think I've caused her a lot of hardship. She must have had many painful experiences. Even so, she grew up to be a fine woman. As my daughter, I couldn't help but shed tears at her happiest announcement in the world." "Oh, Mom, you're jumping the gun. Save those tears for the wedding, okay?" Alyssa took out a handkerchief and wiped my tears. Seeing me cry so shamelessly, the young man standing next to her smiled and said, "You have a wonderful mother." There were many painful things that made me want to run away, but I was able to overcome them because Alyssa was there. I intend to continue being a person that Alyssa can be proud of as her mother.